So, hi guys, we have a few more there. Just joined us. We'll give it a few more minutes. So, Faith, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks, good, thank you. And my builders have left, which is really good news.
Oh, amazing,
So,
amazing.
so we're not going to have the sounds of hammers in the background or
Yeah.
anything like that. So,
Yeah, well, we might have the sound of people returning back from school and my 4 month 4 months, 4 months, come back into the house as well too. But it'll be all good. It'll be all
yeah.
good. All part of it. So yeah. So what we out working today or anything as well? Were you in schools or based at home today? Were you, Faith?
Oh, me, sorry. At home today, yes.
At
Yeah.
home today. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Well, look, I think as I said, we are thankfully we are recording this, which is great. I am actually just going to pop this live to on to our Facebook page as well. So I will go live here. So we are now going to go live. It should say now soon. So thanks to the guys who have already got it. Perfect. So we are now streaming live to on our Facebook page. So thank you very much. So to all the guys that are on the webinar as well, this is being recorded and will be shared out. None of your names or anything will be put on this, but if you do want to speak, by all means do ask questions at the end, or if you want, you can type them into the chat box, and then I will ask Faith any questions out of this. So we should have a few more join us throughout this, but I think that we just will get it going. I'll introduce Faith here a little bit. She can elaborate a little bit on, but Faith has years, how many, well, you can ask this one, how many years experience of PT or OT, and wasn't it 11 or more?
Yeah. Yeah.
11 years as an OT. She's a parent, probably more importantly as well. Sarah, your two children as well. Would both of them have autism as well, or
Yeah.
both?
One's diagnosed and one, she's only 3, but we're pretty sure she's autistic as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant. So again, huge amount of experience coming from in a professional capacity, but also in a life capacity. So I think you're going to be able to share so much. And more recently, Faith is now also an author. So this is her amazing book, and this is why we are here today. So I picked this book up. I think I was listening through a podcast, picked it up and couldn't put it down. I just thought this helped us so much, helped our coaches, helped teachers that I've shared it with as well too. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Some of the information that's in this book and share it with you guys. So, Faith, I will pass it over to you. And if we have any questions, we'll ask him at the end. So, thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Gary. Thanks, guys, for joining us on a Friday afternoon. And I hope you've got a cup of tea or a biscuit or something to keep you going. I've got mint straws by me, so I'll see if I get a chance to have any. Right, I'm going to share my screen, which we practiced earlier. And oh, right, it's now not on the first one. Right, just 1 second. You wouldn't think we've practiced all this before, would you? um, right, here we go. Okay. Mhm. Right. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Um, so yes, I'm Faith Newton, OT, and I thought we'd just start off, and while you're chatting, I'll go back and make sure everyone can see this full screen. But it'd be really helpful if you could just pop in the chat, how do you feel about teaching PE to students with SEND? You might feel quite confident, maybe feel a bit anxious, a bit unsure. There's kind of no right or wrong answers. It'd just be really helpful to kind of know, how do you feel at this point in time about teaching PE to students with SEND? So if you feel comfortable to pop that in the chat, that'd be brilliant. And I'm just going to try and make it full screen while you do that. Brilliant. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So Jack has put reasonably okay, but we can always learn new ideas. And I think that's totally right. Like inclusion is a journey, isn't it? Kind of none of us have got all the answers. It can be quite a long process to become more inclusive. But I hope today you maybe even just get a handful of new ideas of things you can try in your class. Okay, so Gary, unsure how to make sure SEND children will be able to take part in the session. Great, thank you. I teach students who are becoming teaching assistants and will be taking lessons with students. Great. So hopefully you can pick up some ideas for Trina that then you can pass on to these upcoming TAs who can use with their students. That's great. We'll just wait a couple of seconds and then we'll keep going. Fab. Okay, so I asked you that because I think it's really important we acknowledge where we're coming from in terms of our experience with SEND, our confidence with SEND, and also for those of you that may not be PE specialists, you may be like a general PE teacher, your experience of PE, because you know PE can be one of those subjects that you love and are really passionate about, or that you can feel quite fearful about teaching. So Gary's already told you a bit about me, but I'm an occupational therapist. And for those of you who aren't familiar with OTs, we go into schools, work with children. Traditionally, we pull out children on a one-to-one basis, but increasingly, I'm feeling that's not really the way to go because there's such big waiting lists. And there's also just not enough resources. If I give you a program for a TA to implement with one child, the chances are you don't have a TA, or they're spread so thinly you can't do my program. So in my book, I've really tried to give strategies of things you can apply to your whole class that will make things better for all children, not just for those with a diagnosis or with SEND. So I'm an OT, I'm a parent carer, and in the bottom photo on the screen, you can see my two kids in an amazing buggy that we bought, which has been brilliant. They're both autistic, and my son can't go to school anymore. So I've kind of experienced firsthand how when school isn't accessible and inclusive, it can cause a lot of problems and issues. And I'm also an author and a speaker now, which is very exciting. Okay, so let's talk about the need, and I'm sure you're all really familiar with this. So why inclusive PE? Well, inclusive PE allows children to experience the benefits of movement without the barriers to participation. And I know you already know all the benefits of movement, kind of short-term and long-term, the social benefits, the physical and academic benefits. And we want that for all our kids, don't we? Not just the sporty ones, not just the kind of able academic ones, but for all students that they can experience the benefits without barriers. So for my book, I used a combination of my experience as an OT, and I also interviewed quite a few parents of students with SEND, and they were telling me things like this. I always get into trouble in PE because I can't handle winning, or the PE hall stinks and it makes me feel sick. I can't sit still. I love PE because I can move around a lot. I hate team games. I get really tired and everyone thinks I'm lazy. So as you can see, for some students, PE is the best lesson of the week and they love it. And for others, it can be the worst. And I even had somebody describe it as a living hell, which was really heartbreaking. And of course, this is for all students. Some love it, some hate it. But with students with SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, there can be additional challenges and additional barriers. And as we all know, every year there's more and more students in mainstream schools that have SEND. And the resources can't cope, the NHS can't cope. And so really, yeah, part of my hope with this webinar and this book is to help equip you a little bit more in what you can do to make a difference. So in a class of 30, what might this look like? You could have 1 to 2 boys who have red-green colour blindness, 1 or 2 kids with DCD, which is developmental coordination disorder, or dyspraxia as it's often known, 1 or 2 children with ADHD, some with dyscalculia, that's difficulty with maths and numbers, and 3 dyslexic students. Now, you're very unlikely to get all of these children in your one class, but the point is that you probably will be facing these needs very regularly. Okay, so that's a little bit about the need. And before we got on, Gary and I were also talking about the impact that COVID's had on students, cost of living, waiting list, kind of all these additional pressures that are on students, and of course, all the pressures on you as teachers. So let's have a little think about rounders. And what I'd like to do to start off with is to think about what demands do students face in these areas. So let's think about a game of rounders. What sensory demands are there? So that might be the texture of the bat. What physical demands are there? Maybe running fast is one. Communication demands could be communicating with a teammate. A cognitive demand could be remembering the instructions. And the emotional, social, and mental health demand could be about if you're caught out or you miss a ball and that kind of feeling. So again, just in the chat, if you can think of any demands for any of these areas, if you just pop them in the chat, yes, that would be brilliant. So what demands does student face when playing rounders in these areas? And I think we're doing about rounders here. In my book, I wrote a chapter about the demands of dodgeball. And, it's so easy to think, oh, this is really simple. It's a bit like when we drive a car. Now you probably just get in the car, you're chatting with somebody, you turn the radio on, you're thinking about dinner, and before you know it, you're home. But if you go back to when you were learning to drive, then it was a very different story. You were probably thinking mirrors, what to do with my foot, what to do with my hand. You had to think about all these demands. And it can be similar with our students, that what we think is a simple game of rounders, dodgeball, actually can be very complex. So thanks for popping stuff in the chat. We've got, the difference between indoor and outdoor, rules, proximity, noise, fear of missing the ball, throwing, striking. It's one of those things where the more you think about it, the more things kind of pop up. So I will show you a few ones that I came up with earlier, Blue Peter style. So if we have a look at sensory, you've got the feel of the bat and the ball. If you're outside, you've got the sun, or inside, you've got lighting. If you're wearing different bibs, you've got the feel of the bibs and the clothing. Noise of shouting, noise of the whistle. If you're inside, you could have the smell of the leftover dinner if you're in the dining hall. And you've also got the visuals of a ball moving through the air, kids running, maybe brightly coloured PE kit, all that going on. So some of the physical demands: running, throwing, hitting, catching, being able to stop, being able to pivot and change direction. And there's a lot of foot, eye and hand coordination going on. If we look at interaction, you've got cooperating with teammates, processing instructions, knowing what team you're in and that you belong to part of that team as well can be a challenge for some kids. Understanding nonverbal communication. So how often do you get kind of kids going, come on, or kind of gesturing that they're going to catch the ball? You've got a lot of nonverbal communication going on, and calling out instructions. Cognitive, you've got the rules. Anticipating speed and direction of others. So this can be particularly a challenge for students who are dyslexic or dyspraxic, being able to anticipate the speed of the ball, the speed of the person behind you, and are they going to run you out, the direction of the ball, all of that can be really challenging. And then, of course, you've got to split your attention between the bowler. This is if you're batting, the bowler, the ball, people running behind you, what the fielders are doing, what the teacher's saying, what your team's doing. There can be an awful lot going on at once, which requires fast decision making and problem solving. So if you didn't hit the ball the first time, you kind of need to problem solve, how do I hit it? Make sure I hit it next time. And then there's also a lot of emotional, social, and mental health demands going on. So you've got the whole hot potato of team selection. Is the teacher picking the team? Is a captain picking the team? How do you handle the emotions if you're winning or losing? How do you handle being run or caught out with everybody watching you? And how does that feel? Waiting in line for your turn, and the whole thing about what's fair, what's not fair as well. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an idea about how just one seemingly simple game of rounders can have a huge number of different demands right there. And there's many others that I've not included as well. So this is a story from a parent I interviewed, and she was watching at the side of the field. I think it must have been like a kind of parent invite game. So she says, my son Tom, not his real name, was playing a game like rounders and was told to go and stand in the field. So he did. But the teacher didn't say, if the ball comes near you, collect it and throw it back. When the ball came near him, he just stood there. In the end, I pulled him to one side and said, when the ball comes, throw it back to the bowler. For my son, inclusive PE is giving him precise instructions, not just expecting him to know what to do. Okay, so we've looked at the need, we've looked at the challenges, and now we're on to a few of the strategies. So let's think about verbal communication. What could have helped Tom? So Tom doesn't know what to do with rounders. Maybe he's not played it before. Maybe he couldn't process the verbal instructions. What can be really helpful is showing videos before you go to the class. And Gary was saying this is one of the things that they do, is to show the whole class the video of the activity or sport they're going to be doing. And this is really helpful for lots of students. Those that have difficulties with receptive language or verbal processing. And there's evidence that shows that autistic kids find it easier to get information from a video than from a demonstration or just visuals. The other thing you can do with videos, of course, is maybe send a clip home or show it to students in advance. So for those who struggle with anxiety and who like advanced preparation, a video clip can be really helpful for them as well. And also just kind of clue parents into what you're doing. So videos are great. Be explicit about rules, exceptions, and nonverbal signs. So when I was writing my book, I came across a story of a boy who was in an after-school club, and he kept going up to the other kids and hitting them. And his mum was like, what is going on? Why does he keep hitting these other kids like unprovoked? And she finally asked him, and he said, well, Mum, I was giving them a high five. And it kind of all became clear. So basically, he hadn't appreciated the etiquette and the kind of social interaction behind a high five, that you usually make eye contact, you put your hand up, and you probably say high five, and then you hit hands. So he was just going around hitting people because he hadn't understood that process. Obviously, that's quite an extreme example, but we rely a lot on non-verbal signs in sport, and it can be really useful to explicitly teach what we mean by different signs and gestures. Autistic children also tend to have a really strong sense of justice, and they will notice if, that one kid always breaks the rules or cuts corners. So being explicit about the rules and when there's exceptions to the rule. So my son, when he was at school, he was about to be sick. but he knew the rule was that you had to put up your hand and ask to go to the toilet. So because of this, he was almost sick all over the floor because none of us had thought to tell him in an emergency, you can just run to the bathroom. So being explicit is really helpful. Giving instructions in a quiet place, not in the PE hall where kids are bouncing the ball, not outside when there's kind of loads of distractions and temptation to play with equipment, but beforehand in a quiet place. And particularly dyslexic learners can really appreciate a big picture overview. So this is obviously a lot of generalizations, but often autistic kids are quite detailed thinkers, and dyslexic kids can really enjoy kind of a big picture overview. I don't know if you're familiar with the term neurodivergent. So neurodiversity is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, talks about the kind of beautiful and great width of differences in our brains. Neurotypical describes brains that are normal or typical, and neurodivergent are brains that aren't, that think and process and experience the world in a different way. And these tend to be, autistic kids, dyslexic, OCD, ADHD, dyscalculia. There's about 12, I think. And there can be very different ways of communicating between neurotypical communication and neurodivergent communication. So a neurodivergent child may not make eye contact because it could be uncomfortable for them or painful. And if you insist on eye contact, they probably won't be able to take in what you're saying. They also may be stimming or fidgeting as a way to help them focus. So trying to learn more about different types of communication can be really helpful. So yes, by showing, had Tom's teacher shown him a video of the game they were going to play and pointed out what the children had to do, Tom could have joined in and got to the field really confidently and known exactly what to do when the ball landed near his feet. Okay, moving on to physical challenges and physical demands. So you're probably familiar with the Youth Sport Trust acronym STEP, which stands for Space, Task, Equipment and People. And it's really useful to think, both before the lesson and kind of on your feet, how can you be adapting things? So take rounders. If you've got some students who are struggling with the amount of running, can you make the pitch a bit smaller? If they're struggling to hit the ball, can you bring the bowler closer? It could be that you can adapt the equipment. So people could have different choices of different size bats, different balls, and maybe different size teams. You can kind of break out into smaller groups and smaller teams. So these are just a few ways that you can be thinking about how to adapt the activity beforehand, and also while you're in the midst of something. And I really like something that Ross Williams said. He's a head of PE and a coach, and he suggested side missions. So if you've got some students who are really struggling with an activity, can you give them a side mission where they are directed to another activity for a short period of time, maybe Giant Connect 4, and then you can also do the same if you take out your high ability students for a side mission. So then the students who struggle a bit more with the activity get more of a chance to access the ball or the equipment. And so you can kind of use the ideas about gamification and side missions to also swap things up and around a little bit. If we're thinking about students with coordination difficulties, that could be those with a diagnosis of dyspraxia, but it may not be. Repetition is really important. So typically, those children need a lot more times of repeating a skill in order to master it. And they usually can't just watch you and know what to do. They may need explicit instructions about what to do with parts of their body. So breaking it down and saying, you need to bend your elbow and lift your hand like this. You need to put a foot behind you. Really breaking it down can be really helpful for those students. and using different levels of challenge. So before we started this, Gary and I were talking, and he was saying about the challenge of making sure that you challenge the students who are really high achieving as well as including ones who are struggling, and this can help with that. So I go to a Pilates class, and I'm probably one of the youngest there and one of the least flexible and fit ones there. But what I love about the teacher is she's great at giving us different levels of challenge. So she'll give us the basic position and say, if you want to make it harder, then try this. If you want to challenge yourself even more, add this in. And if it's a bit too much, have a rest at any time, go back to the easier position at any time. And because she says that, it makes me feel included and I enjoy the session and I keep going. So have a think about how you can offer different levels of challenge in your class. It's kind of easier doing things like circuits and stations, but there may be a way that you can think of to include those different levels of activities and challenge. And it could be even just giving students the freedom to experiment with how close or far they stand from their partner doing catching, how high they raise something for jumping over, things like that. The pictures are of, on the right, people with red-green colour blindness. This is what they would see. So as you can see, there's just a lot of yellow going on in that picture, and you can't differentiate the teams at all, can you? So this is just an example of how you could change something really simple, like the colour shirts that students are wearing, which immediately can make it more inclusive for students with colour blindness. Okay, so this is a story from a parent I interviewed. And she said, my son batted while someone else ran. He came home laughing, saying his teacher had asked him why he didn't do his own runs with his electric wheelchair because nobody would beat him. And so, you've got a child using an electric wheelchair doing rounders, but the teacher and the school obviously had thought a bit more creatively, and they got him to bat and someone else ran. And because of that, he had a positive experience and he came home laughing and really happy and feeling really included. And so that's what we want for all our students. Okay, moving on to the sensory environment. And I know this is a whistle-stop tour of everything we're going through. So there's a lot of sensory stuff going on, as we already touched on earlier. And I think, though, before we go into this, it's really important to normalise sensory needs, because we all have sensory needs. Imagine if you're on the motorway, you're really thirsty, you're really hot, and you're desperate for a wee. Like in that situation, you're not going to be very patient. You're not going to be able to think about much else other than your basic needs being met. Similarly, if you're kind of in a dark, creepy house at night and you hear a small noise, you're going to be on alert. So we all have sensory needs and sensory thresholds that go up and down. And I think it'd be really helpful to normalise this by talking with our students about, we all have sensory needs, we all have sensory preferences, and making kind of quiet, calm spaces available to anyone who needs it. And just talking about your own sensory and emotional needs can be really helpful. Touch can be a really big deal. So think about how much choice you're giving students. Do they really have to hold hands, or can they hold a ribbon or a baton between them? If they are going to be touching, can you make it predictable? Because unpredictable sudden touch for a sensitive child can be really scary and really threatening. So try and make touch really predictable. It may be saying, we're only going to touch on the shoulder, or just something like that. Try and avoid using whistles if you can. I know it's not as practical, but just being mindful about how much noise can be going on in a session. And the same with visuals. So if you've got moving objects, imagine there's 15 balls flying around the room, kids running around. If you cannot have really bright, awful curtains at the window, fluorescent lighting, and loads of crazy coloured posters, that would just really help. those kids that are sensitive to visual information to be able to focus and be there. So yes, changing food PE can be very hard. And I know in COVID, some schools let students come in PE kit, and that can still be really helpful for some as well. So teams, just thinking about this, it can be a marketplace, can't it? A bit of a cattle market. So I remember when I was at school, I was always the last one to be picked, and it was so humiliating, and I hated it. And I think, you know, a lot of teachers are aware of this and don't let students pick their own teams. But what we're not always aware of is selecting partners. So there's been studies shown that actually girls tend to pick their best friends for partners and boys tend to pick other sporty boys. And there can be a lot of exclusion going on when everyone pairs off and there's one or two people left looking really awkward. So thinking about how do you select teams and pairs. And for group work, a smaller group not only kind of gives more opportunity to actually practice the skills and get near the ball or the equipment, but it also makes the social interactions a lot less complex and a lot easier. And if you can keep the teams consistent, that's even better. So I know Guy who blogs as I'm Sporticus, he will keep the teams consistent for the whole team all year. And so they really kind of get to know each other and build up that relationship. And again, for students who are struggling with change or uncertainty, that consistency of the team could be really reassuring. This was in a blog I read recently. And before they actually started doing sports as teams, the teacher assigned them just a bit of time to get to know each other. So they were walking around the field in their teams, getting to know each other, building up that relationship. So when it came to playing in teams, they had a bit more trust and a bit more confidence together. And as it says, it became really fun and everyone was included. So coming into land now, but you know, I think thinking about balance. So of course you're going to want some competitive games or some noisy games, but just try and make sure that not every activity in your lesson is noisy, is competitive. Not every lesson that term is really fast paced and overwhelming. Think about the balance. Can you have team things and individual things, competitive and collaborative? Slow and fast pace, and change the intensity as well. So yeah, and we've gone through a lot. I just wonder if there's one thing that you can think of that you could do to make your sessions more inclusive. So if you want to put that in the chat, that was great. Let's have a little think. And yes, back to you, Gary.
Amazing, Faith. Thank you so much. I turned on my light now and it's kind of knocked everything off there. But yeah, really, 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 really good. I even took a lot more, even reading the book and then taking a lot more from that. I think I probably want to touch on the book there. Now I know you have it on screen, but the thing for me as a practitioner as such, um, so they want to have a look. Somebody wants to have a look maybe at the last slide as well, then too about balance. So if you want to put it back to that, and I can show the book here kind of on screen. But
Yeah.
just as the people are looking at that on balance about different things that you can do, I think the thing I love about your book, it's broke down into different sections. So if there is children in your class who with dyslexia, ADHD, autism, there's there, but it's really good at the end. You give out the strategies. So here's what might happen. Here's the theory behind it. Here's all of this, but here's the strategies that you could put in place. We mentioned before in the call, none of these strategies, the biggest thing I would put around them is awareness. There's no need for huge equipment. There's no need for anything. So I thought that was really good. I'll let open it up here now to you guys for a bit of Q&A. Just to start off, I just wrote down a few things. One of them was you talked about the color blindness. What for color blindness, what would be the best color of bibs to use or not to use against each other?
Yes, there's a whole range. There's several. I think there's three main different types of color blindness. The most common one is red and green. So not using red and green. Um, for visuals is what's quite useful. It's called the grayscale test. So if you think about you're going to be putting a poster up or a visual up, if you can tell the difference when you photocopy it or put it in grayscale, then someone who's colorblind can tell the difference. So say if you've got a chart and it's in you know, typical traffic light when red, orange, and green, that can be quite problematic. But if you have used different intensities of shadings, you have kind of light, medium, and dark, in grayscale, you can tell the difference. Um, so
Yeah.
yes, so that's
Is
one
that
key thing.
would that be like a self-test then for like a teacher if you were
Yeah.
do that then? So that would be rather than
Yeah.
being
So if you go to
diagnosed as such.
print and just, usually it can
Yeah,
say print in color or grayscale. If you click on
yeah.
grayscale in print preview, and then you can go through your visuals, slides, whatever, and just check.
Yeah,
Um,
very good. Very
so that,
interesting that.
who is really good is the Colour Blindness Awareness, is a charity and a website. They have loads of amazing information. They have videos, they have kind of PDFs about how it relates to sport, and they talk a lot more about like specific combinations because it's quite complicated. Yes, it's not even like just a case of, use this color and not this color. There's kind of can be quite a lot to it for different people. So I'd really recommend kind of looking at colorblind awareness when you're thinking about equipment. But the basic thing would be don't have green cones on green grass. Don't have red and green bibs because they're going to look the same.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just the basic, but then that magnifies in for somebody else too with essentially with color blindness. It's interesting even that slide you put up in terms of the ratios even and the amount of people in a class of 30 could potentially have the disorders. I actually took a picture of that, so I'll share that as well too. Another thing I noticed in the book and it was really interesting, and I think it's invaluable actually to share with children is in each of them you put down like sport athletes that have certain things. So like Simone Biles at ADHD, Rio Ferdinand has dyslexia, all of these, and you're going, wow. And even for me reading that, it was kind of like a wow, but like sharing that with children in the class, just in a class environment, it's all say, here, look, this is what can actually happen, but you can achieve anything you really want. So that was really anything to add on to that. I suppose that was interesting to even find that out, was it?
Yeah, and there's a few things that really kind of just jumped to mind. The amount of dancers who are dyslexic
Oh yeah.
is really interesting. Um, and so, when I was researching more into dyslexia, like the amount of people who are dyslexic, who are entrepreneurs and who are in the performing arts industries is like two or three times higher. Is that you? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
me. That's
Yeah.
me.
But two or three times higher than average. And you just see like all the kind of skills of like holistic, creative thinking, kind of so many different strengths that people are bringing to these industries. So that was one. The other one was how many athletes have ADHD. Um, is really quite interesting. I can't remember the exact. I'm not going to find it right now, but I've put on a Facebook message or something. But yeah, so again, things like being able to hyper focus. So although we often think of ADHD as struggling to maintain attention, when people are really interested in something, they can often have quite tunnel kind of hyper focus. And that's what you want as an athlete, isn't it? You want to be completely
Yeah.
focusing and you want to be impulsive and you want to take risks and you want to be fast. So actually, those things that can make it really hard for a kid to sit in maths on a Friday afternoon can make them an amazing athlete. Um, so I think, yeah, I've tried to in the book to really draw on the strengths
Yeah.
of kind of different diagnoses and not look at like all the issues and all the problems, but actually, how can we be aware of the challenges because they're there, and how can we draw on the strengths and inspire kids as well? And I
Amazing.
think if we're aware about neurodiversity, we can do that. So with my son, who's autistic, I'm always saying to him, your brain's amazing at this, and I can't do that. and your brain struggles with that, and my brain's fine with it. Just normalizing that our brains are different, and that's fine.
Yeah, amazing there. And there's a great question there. I might have a wee bit of feedback on it, but I'll throw it on yourself. But any advice for a supply teacher who is thrown into PE for one lesson for one day? Great
Fab,
question.
yep. Yes, good question. I mean, would you get any kind of heads up in that situation about any children with EHCPs or anything?
So it all
I guess
depends.
depends on the school,
Sometimes,
doesn't it?
yeah, it is, and I suppose I'll throw it back on to that you know it's something that we always come up with as a company first, and I'll share that, and then I suppose you can share that with be when we go into a classroom, how much time do we have to prepare? Because some of the thing might only be because of lack of communication with the school or whatever. We might just say to the teacher saying, is there anything we need to know about the
Yeah.
class? Or is there anything? And it's quite hard to do that at times whenever the children are sitting there, the kid coming in and say, well, you need to watch out for Warwick because he has blah, blah. And then you're adapting and changing it. And I think that sometimes is the issue, but it comes back to that awareness. So what would you suggest that if there was, what could be plans put in place for a school, for example, if that was the case?
Yeah. So I think Um, if you can get a heads up, brilliant, about any kind of specific needs. Otherwise, I think just a few simple things. It may be, if you know in the morning you're teaching rounders in the afternoon, can you find a 2-minute video clip on YouTube to play? Um, can you make sure you're not swapping teams and partners every time, but you stick with them and you choose them? Can you make sure you're not using a red and green pen on the board? Um, can you even acknowledge that people have got different feelings? Some of you may love it, some of you may hate it. Um, can you give different challenges, even if it's like, some of you may want to hold onto the wall when you do this position. Some of you may want to put, all your limbs in the air. Even if it's these tiny little things you can do, that will really help some of your students. And
Yeah.
you're not going to get perfectly inclusive, but hopefully just a few of the things. Just think through today, what one or two things can I have in my back pocket? Um, Even the whole thing like the step, how can I adjust the distance the kids have to throw or catch if it's not working? Just a couple of these small things can be really helpful.
And do you think like it would be a worthwhile exercise, say, for a teacher now, even though they may not be, but they could be off for whatever reason, that to have that sort of list and in terms of like triggers that may happen because in a classroom environment, we would always say compared to, for example, PE is a totally different environment. So, and it can work both ways. So, what are the triggers? And we would always go along with that. That is it, like the sensory set thing of like we've been in classes where we can't use softballs because of that sensory touch. That they are getting color is one thing, noise is a huge thing, and teams. The big thing you even said in your book as well too about how so many children excel. And I think it's a huge thing we have in our curriculums is very team-based focused, that we don't give the children the opportunity to be the individual. So, for example, probably one of the best ones, I think it was in the book as well, too, you mentioned about running and how
Yeah.
much joy and positive experience children get from doing a run because it was there. So would you suggest maybe something like that for teachers to have some sort of a list that if it is PE day, potentially these are the triggers that might happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's almost like a step before that. So the ideal school, the Senko or the class teacher or the head of PE be writing to everybody and saying, if your child has any issues with PE in these areas, please let us know. And what movement do they love? Because in the book, I talk about, the students that become Paralympians and they were sat out of PE because the school didn't know about this sport they're amazing at or didn't include them. And so just because you have Bob, who may really hate PE, he may be amazing at rock climbing. You just don't know it. So I think having that communication about the triggers, about the strengths in advance, and then having kind of wider policies and curriculum design around, you know what, we always have a quiet corner with sensory toys that's open access. And we always talk about emotional regulation and sensory regulation. Um, and we have a plan for kids that can't physically engage. Could they be the sports reporter? Could they be videoing it? You know, how can we include them? This is just part of our kind of practice and policy. Um, because if you've got all that in place, then as a supply teacher, it's much easier. And obviously, you don't get to control that. But I think there is this bigger picture in terms of curriculum and policy and practice as well.
Yeah, it's huge. No, I think it's really good because we actually introduced that a lot into some of ours because we actually find from ourselves, and I think some teachers will find if they do take after school, the difference between delivering PE programs and delivering after school programs because of that sense of, you are in a school, it's controlled, but that bell goes, there is a shift in mindset even from the children. And we started introducing like the zones of regulation. So
Mm,
going through, if you're in the blue zone, the red zone, and a lot of our kids potentially were in the yellow zone, but we had that's we called it our safe zone. That if they needed time out, so if they were feeling overwhelmed or they were feeling anxious, or we felt, look, you're a little bit in the red zone or the yellow
yeah,
zone, you're a wee bit hyper. So they go over and, if it was Lego, if it was a book, if there was something like you said, Connect Four, like a huge Connect Four, go over and take your time out, or even physically, if they're like, I am so tired, brilliant. Because they're like dyspraxic or different things where people just maybe don't have that core strength or ability to perform basic things, and they're not lazy, they're just maybe tired.
yeah.
So having that as a thing is huge. I know it just not because you're on. For me personally, I know everybody's watching this and is on. Thank you so much for joining us. But I would say please buy this book, not just because it's on, but because it sets up it's made me think so much more. And the biggest word I put down here and just circled so many times is awareness. It's just delivering a level of awareness where you can go and go, oh, you know what? I can actually think about that. Or right now I know why that child is reacting like that. Maybe I will try this and that could make a difference. If it doesn't, brilliant. I've tried something. Let's see what else could work. And I think that's a huge thing. So yeah, so if anybody's any other questions there, guys, thank you for staying on here too. I know I kind of blabbered on because it's always a passion coming through in it, and I know the effect that physical activity, PE, and everything. Because my mission is that, and for what we do is we want people to fall in love with physical activity, so they're active for the rest of their life, not to be sports stars, but to be physically active and the benefits that happens. And PE is the first opportunity for most in an environment where they're going to have a positive or negative experience. It'll never be neutral, and the more positive experiences we can get by being more aware of sensory issues, cognitive thinking, physical demands, amazing. So yeah, have you anything to add on there, Faith, on that or anything before we close?
I just think, I start the book, I talk about a new model of PA, and it draws a lot of meaning for PA and physical literacy kind of principles. But yeah, really, if we can get kids to enjoy it, that's so key, like you say. And I think in order to enjoy it, you have to have some success. You don't want to feel rubbish the whole time, that you're not going to enjoy it. So you have to be able to achieve some success and some choice. So just kind of asking the students, what would you like to try? What do you enjoy? And adding some kind of novelty and gamification in. So one woman I read about, she uses a rubber chicken. And so, they're just doing like a throwing game, but there's a chicken there. And so suddenly it's fun, it's funny, it's novelty, and it's taken away the pressure. And it's like, okay, that group's doing throwing with a chicken, that one's got a rugby ball, they've got a beach ball, so you're going to get kids that get more success because it's easier to catch a slow balloon than a ball, but you've got fun and you've got enjoyment. And I think that's really key as well.
Yeah, no, it is. It's huge, and I think it's getting away from that thing. It sounds simple, like you say there. Whenever I'm delivering PE staff training, one of the things I start with my throwing is use a bib. Always start with bib. you
Mm.
know, no matter what. And because it gives you for a bigger surface area, it's going to take longer to fall, to drop, the opportunity to catch in. There's so much you can do. Children start to get inventive and start tying knots into it so they can go further. And you're like, you're like letting the creativity actually join into it as well. So from this, but it's funny because today I was actually coaching this morning and we're on a multi-sports kind of thing. So I was teaching spatial awareness and I asked it was an older Key Stage 2 group, and I asked them what you want to play, and they went through difference. And one of them was rugby, and a lot of them had never played it.
Mm.
But whenever I broke it down and just added in simple rules, it was so complex. And the thing is, we had a conversation after. Not a lot of them enjoyed it,
Mm.
but I was able to turn that and say, guys, amazing you actually tried that. That's really good because it is complex. But you know, it's in the Six Nations coming up now. You might actually link in and see a little bit of difference. But if you didn't enjoy that, amazing. But every single one of them were trying. We stopped it kind of early because you could see the enjoyment factor, but we talked about it and they went away and going, it's
Yeah.
all right if you didn't like it. That's
Yeah.
fine. You
And it
know,
could be like one of the other things with gamification is about letting the students change the rules. So it could be next time it's like, okay, you guys get to, what rules should we change? What rules are boring? What do we like? How are we going to? So it probably won't look that much like rugby, but again, it can be creative, take ownership. And then if you have two different groups, they can teach each other to play their own versions of it as
yeah.
well.
Amazing. Funny, we took away the back pass rule for this one and we were like, yeah, let's just go. And you could see the difference of it happening. But again, going back and just ask them next week because we had like give them choice of well, we could do volleyball, we can do archery. What do you want? And it was just the excitement leaving the end to say, okay, well, that was done. Now next week I know what we're doing. Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant. You have had the choice. So that was really good. So look, I think we could probably talk all day about all of this and share stories. So hopefully people got in just conscious. We have went over just a few minutes, which is great. But it is Friday. People are probably like, I'm gonna go home. Um, but Faith, I just want to personally thank you so much for first of all writing the book. I think it's going to help a lot of people. Second of all, for jumping on here. All this will be recorded. You also sent me a resource which I will send. So it's a lot of YouTube links and stuff. So that's it. So yeah, a few thank yous as well too. Um, so
I
yeah,
know Stella asked about the slides. Are you sending the slides out, Gary, or shall I?
yeah, I can.
That's fine,
I'll
Stella.
if you're happy enough,
Yep.
and that's it. And also from our point of view, anybody who is on the webinar, please reach out for ourselves because we have an online portal that has over 800 resources on it. More, sorry, over 1,000 now, from full online videos which the kids can watch and like a full PE session can be done in the classroom. So it takes away a lot of sensory stuff, but also PE lessons, which all the games are pre-videoed. So a lot of schools are actually showing them in the classroom first and then going down to the PE hall. Like you mentioned, in a
Yep.
quiet, controlled area. Okay, let's go now and do it there.
Yep.
So reach out if that's something that you think will help massively with you guys, and we can talk a little bit further. But this was all about you today, Faith. I think my first step for people would be buy this book.
And it's reduced at the moment. So on Amazon, there's a
Oh,
pound off that they've done. So yeah,
there you
don't know how long
go.
for, but there you go. It's
And if you
ebook
don't,
and paperback as well.
oh, brilliant. And if you don't mind me asking, what is the price again? Because it's
So
a
it's normally 14.99 for the paperback. That's free delivery, but
yeah,
it's 13.99 at the moment.
amazing. One
And 9.99 for the ebook.
So 9.99 or 13.99 to change a load of kids' lives. That's a bargain in my eyes. So yeah, so guys, thank you. I'll share the link out as well too and all the stuff as well. And appreciate everybody's time and effort. And thank you as well too for your comments and for Faith for your amazing insight. And we shall see you all soon, guys. So Faith, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.